The glass didn't shatter. It detonated. One strike. The window of the charcoal-gray Genesis exploded inward, and the sound bounced off every wall in that bay like the building itself flinched. Jae-wook's hand was on the ignition key. He never turned it. I reached through the broken window, grabbed his collar, and pulled. Hard. He came across the console, through the frame, and hit the concrete floor before his security team could even process the sound. The boss of the Korean Syndicate's West Coast operation. On the floor, pulled there by a valet. Then the car exploded. Not the whole car. The ignition. A shaped charge wired to the starter relay. Small. Surgical. The driver's seat punched into the roof. The windshield blew out in one piece. Fire rolled up through the hood, slow and certain. One turn of that key, and there would have been nothing left of him. Baek Sung-il hit the wall from the blast pressure. 3 federal marshals came through the service entrance at a run. And I stood over Aeon Jae-wook, glass in my hair, hands still shaking, staring at a man who had just realized the only thing between him and a closed casket was the woman he never once looked at. But this didn't start here. It started 93 days ago, with a woman in a black uniform standing into the rain, watching. One turn of that key, and he was gone forever. The only person who knew was the valet nobody looked at. Drop fire emojis in the comments, because you already know this woman was never just parking cars. My name is Kendra Mercer. That was the ending. Now let me tell you how I got there. The Grand Seorim Hotel. 22 floors of marble and quietly negotiated crimes. The kind of place where a valet doesn't just park cars. A valet witnesses history. 6 weeks in, south entrance. That's when Jae-wook first pulled up. No plates. Blacked out windows. 2 SUVs flanking him like they were paid to breathe. Every staff member went still when he stepped out. Not respect. Instinct. He didn't look at me. None of them ever did. First mistake. Because I looked at everything. Sung-il, his head of security. Checked left before right. Every time. Without fail. Half-second blind spot on his dominant side. I logged at day 3. The second SUV always parked 2 feet closer to the exit than it should. Not habit. Calculation. Someone on that team was already planning the escape before the meeting even started. And Jae-wook himself, every single time before entering the building, reached for his left jacket pocket. Not his phone. Not his wallet. Something that needed confirming. Something that had to still be there. I watched it happen 11 times before I stopped counting. My grandmother used to say, chess, not checkers. The board is always set. You just have to decide which piece you are. I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be a pawn. Week 8. I got reassigned. Not fired. The Seorim didn't fire useful people. It absorbed them. The underground valet bay. Private. Coded elevator. 3 vehicles. 3 clients. All syndicate. The woman who moved me was Yoon Dae-ri, Director of Private Services. Elegant title for the woman who made problems stop existing. She didn't ask if I wanted it. She told me I started Monday. That's how they operated. No offers. Just assumptions. They assumed I'd be grateful. Dazzled. They had no idea proximity was exactly what I came for. 6 days before the reassignment, I found a photograph. Dead drop. Manila envelope. Glove box of a vehicle I was parking. Inside. 1 photograph. A woman. Mid-30s. Natural hair. The kind of face that looks like someone you already love before you know why. Her name on the back. Written careful, deliberate, like whoever wrote it needed it to last. Zanele Dube. Forensic accountant. Undercover operative. Missing. 4 months. Last known location. The underground bay of the Grand Seorim Hotel. Nobody reported it to the right people. Because the right people were on the wrong side. I tucked the photograph into the lining of my jacket. Went back to work. She was alive somewhere in this city. And the man whose car I parked every morning knew exactly where. I just needed him to show me. So I waited. I watched. And I started learning Korean. The car was a black Mercedes S-Class. Registered to nobody I could trace. Dropped off by a man who didn't make eye contact and left on foot before I finished the ticket. Standard syndicate behavior. I'd learned that fast. I drove it down to the lower lot, killed the engine, reached for the glove box to log the mileage, and stopped. Manila envelope. No label. No seal. Just sitting there, like it had been waiting specifically for me. I looked around. Empty lot. Security camera in the far corner. But I already knew that one had a 12-second rotation gap. Whoever left this knew that too. I opened it. One photograph. Single print. No metadata. The kind of picture taken from a distance by someone who couldn't afford to get closer. A woman. Mid-30s. Natural hair pulled back. Strong jaw. The kind of face that carries something. Purpose, maybe. Or the weight of knowing too much. Her name was on the back. Zanele Dube. Underneath it. 4 words. Last seen. Seorim Bay. That was it. No instructions. No contact information. No explanation of who left it or why it landed in my hands specifically. I flipped it over again. Stared at her face. My contact had mentioned a sister once. Briefly. The way people mention things they're trying not to make real by saying out loud. A forensic accountant. Sharp. Careful. Working something big and working it alone. That was 7 months ago. I hadn't heard her name since. Until now. 4 months missing. Last known location. This building. This bay. The same coded elevator I rode every shift. The same concrete floor I walked every morning before the city fully woke up. She hadn't just disappeared. She had been disappeared. And everyone with the authority to ask questions had decided, quietly, not to ask them. I sat in that car for 11 seconds. I know because I counted. Then I tucked the photograph into the lining of my jacket, flat against my ribs, where it would stay warm and hidden and real. And I zipped it shut. Walked back to the booth. Clocked back in. Smiled at the attendant coming off his shift. Asked if he wanted the last of the coffee. That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of work. The moments that change everything don't announce themselves. They arrive in plain envelopes inside borrowed cars and empty parking lots. And the only thing that separates the people who act from the people who don't is what you decide to do in those 11 seconds. I decided. Right there, in that car, with her face pressed against my ribs, I was going to find Zanele Dube, and the man upstairs in his 22nd floor suite, the one whose car I parked, whose habits I'd memorized, whose left jacket pocket held something he checked like a prayer. He was going to lead me to her. He just didn't know it yet. She found a missing woman's photograph in a glove box, no badge, no backup, no one to call, and she zipped it into her jacket and went back to work. Comment below. What does that kind of quiet courage even have in a name? Because most people would have put it back. She didn't. And that decision changed everything. Hyundai Ri didn't knock. She appeared. The way precise, dangerous women appear. Already inside the space before you registered, the door had opened. Compact. Expressionless. The kind of still that isn't calm. It's control. She had been watching me for 2 weeks. I knew because I'd been watching her watch me. She placed a new access card on the counter between us. Didn't explain it. Didn't need to. Underground Bay. Private rotation. You start Monday. That was the entire conversation. The Underground Bay was a different world. Same building. Different rules. 3 vehicles. 3 clients. No names on any paperwork that connected to anything real. The coded elevator was the only way in or out. And the code changed every 72 hours. The other valets didn't ask why I'd been moved. In places like this, you don't ask why. You just notice who got moved and file it away. The syndicate didn't recruit with job offers. They recruited with access. They gave you proximity to power and watched what you did with it. If you got dazzled, you were useful. If you got greedy, you were managed. If you stayed quiet and competent and asked nothing, they decided you were safe. I was none of those things. But I looked exactly like all of them. The photograph was still in my jacket lining. Every morning I rode that coat elevator down. I felt it against my ribs. Flat, steady, a reminder of exactly why I'd maneuvered myself into a position where proximity to Jae-wook wasn't suspicious. It was expected. I was his valet now. I handled his car, his keys, his departure times, his preferred parking angle. Driver's side always within 3 feet of the exit column. Every preference memorized, every habit logged. And every time he walked past me without looking, I added another entry to a profile he didn't know existed. They thought they'd promoted a good worker. They'd actually handed the keys, literally, to the one person in that building who was building a case against them, one quiet observation at a time. Zanelli's photograph stayed warm against my ribs, and I went to work. Here is what nobody tells you about men like Cheon Jae-wook. They are not simply cruel. Cruelty is inefficient. And Jae-wook was, above everything else, a man of efficiency. Every person in his orbit had a designated role, a designated value, and a designated expiration date. He didn't hate people. He categorized them. And the most dangerous category, the one that got people like Zanelli Dubé disappeared, was liability. But even the most controlled men have tells. And up close, inside the underground bay, 3 feet from his vehicle every morning, I started seeing his. The pocket touch was the first one. It had always been a gesture of confirmation. I have what I need. I am prepared. The hand goes to the left jacket pocket, feels the weight, moves on. Clean, automatic. But somewhere around week 10, it changed. The hand lingered. 1 second too long, pressing slightly, like he needed more than confirmation, like he needed reassurance. There's a difference between those two things. Confirmation is calm. Reassurance is fear wearing a calm mask. Then came the schedule changes. Jae-wook ran on clockwork. Same entrance time, same exit window, same vehicle rotation every 72 hours, like a man who understood that predictability was its own kind of force for the armor. Then in 9 days, he changed his departure time 4 times. Twice at the last minute. Sung-il scrambled both times, tried to hide it. But I'd been watching Sung-il long enough to know what his composed face looked like, and what it looked like when composure was a performance. He was performing, which meant Jae-wook was rattled, which meant something inside his operation had cracked. I didn't know what yet, but I knew the feeling. I'd seen it before, not in boardrooms or hotel bays, but in the faces of people who built their whole lives on control and felt it start to slip. The higher you build, the more you have to lose, and the more you have to lose, the louder the fear gets. I filed everything, every changed schedule, every lingered pocket touch, every micro-expression Sung-il tried to bury. And I kept parking the cars, kept logging the keys, kept smiling when Sung-il barked orders at me like I was furniture. Because men who think you're furniture never watch what you do when they turn their backs. Jae-wook was cracking. I didn't know why yet. But Zanelli's photograph was still against my ribs, and something told me, whatever was making this man afraid was connected to her. I just needed proof. I needed him to give it to me himself. He was cracking, schedule changes, lingered pocket touches, a head of security performing composure instead of exercising it. And the only person who noticed was the woman parking his car. Comment below. What do you think was in that left jacket pocket? Because I've seen this story 100 times, and the answer is never what you expect. The bay had a quirk nobody talked about. Something about the curved concrete walls and the drainage channels running beneath the floor. Sound traveled in ways that didn't make architectural sense. A conversation in the far corner arrived in the service alcove like it was happening 3 feet away. I discovered it by accident on my 4th week. I never told anyone. That Tuesday evening, I was in the alcove logging keys behind the half wall of steel lockers. Invisible. Routine. The kind of presence that registers as furniture. Jae-wook was at his vehicle. He wasn't leaving yet. He was pacing. Short, tight movements. The kind a caged man makes when he needs to think, but can't afford to look like he's thinking. His phone was to his ear. He was speaking Korean. Low. Pressured. The voice of a man managing something that had stopped cooperating. I had been learning Korean for 2 months. Not fluently. Enough. Enough to follow a conversation if it moved slowly. Enough to catch the words that carried the most weight. And what I caught that evening stopped everything. She found the transfers. Pause. Listening. If it reaches the prosecutor before Friday, another pause. Longer. Handle it before the summit. Quietly. 3 fragments. That's all I needed. Because I knew who she was. Zanelli had found the financial transfers. The ones that connected the syndicate's laundering network to accounts that would bring the whole West Coast operation down. She'd built the case quietly, carefully, the way forensic accountants build cases. In numbers, in paper trails, in evidence that doesn't lie even when people do. And she had found something. Something big enough that Jae-wook, a man who didn't rattle, was pacing an underground bay at 9 in the evening, changing schedules, pressing his left jacket pocket like a prayer. Handle it before the summit. Quietly. I knew what quietly meant. In the syndicate's language, quietly meant permanently. I stayed behind that half wall until he left. Didn't move. Didn't write anything down. Didn't need to. Every word was already carved into me. The summit was Friday. That was a Tuesday. 72 hours. I rode the elevator back up alone. Stood in it for the full 30 seconds it took to reach the lobby level. Zanelli was alive. She had to be. You don't handle someone who's already gone. You only handle a threat that's still moving. Which meant she was still out there. Which meant there was still time. 72 hours. No badge. No weapon. No one inside this building I could trust with what I'd just heard. Just me. A valet uniform. A photograph pressed against my ribs. And a man who had just told someone, in a language he assumed I didn't understand, exactly what he planned to do. He assumed wrong. I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. Smiled at the front desk attendant. Asked if it was still raining outside. It was. I walked back to my post and started building the final move. The most dangerous thing I could do that Wednesday was act different. So I didn't. I showed up 4 minutes early. Pressed uniform, hair pulled back clean. I took the elevator down, logged the keys, and started the rotation like it was any other morning in any other week. 60 seconds faster on every vehicle return. Not enough to be noticed. Just enough to be appreciated. I memorized every preference I hadn't already locked down. Jae-wook's seat position, the temperature he kept his cabin, the exact angle Sung-il preferred the SUV parked so his exit line stayed clear. I gave them everything they expected from someone who had accepted their place. Sung-il barked at me twice that morning. Once about a key tag. Once about nothing. The kind of nothing powerful men bark about when the pressure they're carrying has to go somewhere. I smiled both times. Not a performance smile, a weapon smile. The kind that says, "I see you," without ever saying a word. Men like Sung-il mistake compliance for submission. Submission for safety. He turned his back on me both times, inside of 10 seconds. But underneath every pressed uniform, and every weapon smile, and every 60-second faster vehicle return, I was thinking about Zanelli. Her face from the photograph. The careful print of her name on the back. 4 months in a city that had decided she didn't matter enough to find. Every smile I gave Sung-il was purchased with her face. Every moment of performance was paid for with the image of a woman running out of time in a location I didn't have yet. 48 hours. By Wednesday evening, Jae-wook's schedule changed again. 5th time in under 2 weeks. Sung-il got the call mid-rotation, and his jaw tightened in that specific way it tightened when he was recalculating under pressure. I watched it happen from 12 feet away. Logged it. Said nothing. The cracks in Jae-wook's operation were spreading faster now. Whatever Zanelli had found. It was still alive. Still moving. Still threatening enough that the most controlled man I'd ever studied couldn't hold his own schedule together. Which meant I was running out of time, too. Thursday was almost here, and I still needed 2 confirmations before I could make the call. I needed 2 confirmations. Not assumptions. Not instincts. Confirmations. The kind that hold up when everything goes sideways and you're standing in a room with no backup, explaining every decision you made alone. I spent Thursday getting them. The first one came through the financial layer. I had been quietly cross-referencing vehicle logs against the syndicate's internal meeting schedule. Something I'd pieced together over weeks from overheard conversations, delivery manifests, and the particular pattern of which clients arrived together and which ones never overlapped. There was a name that kept appearing in the margins. An internal accounts manager. Mid-level. The kind of person powerful enough to access the laundering architecture, but invisible enough that nobody monitored his movements closely. He had been logging extra hours for 6 weeks. Not working late. Copying. He had kept a version of Zanelli's compiled documents. The financial transfers, the account trails, the prosecutor-ready evidence. As personal insurance. The kind of insurance you only need if you're planning for the syndicate to fall and want to be standing on the right side when it does. Zanelli's work wasn't destroyed. It was alive, protected, waiting. Confirmation 1. Locked. The second confirmation hit harder. Thursday evening. Bay rotation. Sung-il took a call near the column. Close enough that the acoustics did what they always did. I caught the words I needed. Private handoff. Friday, 5:47. Bay. And then, the one that stopped my blood cold. Not the airport. He goes clean. Jae-wook was leaving the country. Not through any system that logged names or flagged passports. Through a private vehicle handoff. Starting in the underground bay of the Grand Seorim Hotel at 5:47 Friday morning. He was going to walk in, settle into that Genesis, reach for that ignition, and disappear. Everything Zanelli had nearly died to build, every transfer, every account, every thread of evidence that connected the syndicate's laundering network to people with real names and real power. Gone. The moment that engine turned over. I finished the rotation, returned every vehicle, logged every key. Rode the elevator up alone and stood in it for the full 30 seconds like I always did. This was no longer about documents. This was about a woman whose name I'd memorized from a photograph, who had done everything right and been disappeared for it, who was still alive. I had to believe that. Somewhere in this city with 48 hours left before the only man who knew her location crossed a border and took that secret permanently with him. One shot. One night. One phone call to the right person with the right information. I stepped out of the elevator, walked to the south entrance, stood in the rain for exactly 90 seconds. Then I went home and made the call. I sat on the edge of my bed for 6 minutes before I picked up the phone. Not because I was afraid, because once I made this call, there was no version of tomorrow where I was still invisible, no version where I was still just a valet, no version where I could pull back, recalculate, choose a different piece on the board. This was the move, the only one left. One contact, the right one. Someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of information from exactly this kind of position, but who could only move if the timing was airtight and the location was confirmed. I had both. I dialed. It rang twice. I spoke before they finished saying hello. Tomorrow, 5:40, Bay. 9 words, 3 pieces of information, everything they needed and nothing they didn't. I hung up. The room felt different after that. Smaller, quieter, the kind of quiet that sits on your chest and reminds you that some decisions, once made, have weight, real weight, the kind you carry in your body, not just your mind. I reached into my jacket, took out the photograph, looked at Zanelli Dubé's face for a long time. 4 months. Disappeared inside a building I walked into every morning. Erased by people who assumed that the right silence from the right people made problems stop existing. They were wrong. I put the photograph back, set my alarm for 4:45 a.m., lay down without undressing, and stared at the ceiling until the city outside went from dark to gray. I didn't sleep. I just waited. Because tomorrow, the most dangerous man on the West Coast was going to reach for an ignition, and I was going to be standing right there. 9 words. That's all it took to set the trap. No badge, no weapon, just a woman who spent 93 days being invisible. And one night, deciding she was done. If this channel deserves to be in your feed, hit subscribe right now. Because what happens in that bay tomorrow morning, you are not ready. The elevator opened at 5:41. 2 minutes early. Intentional. I needed the bay before he arrived, needed to feel the geometry of it one final time. The camera angles, the column positions, the exact distance between the service entrance and the driver's side door of the Genesis. I had walked this bay 100 times. This time I walked it like a blueprint. Jaywook's charcoal gray Genesis sat in its assigned spot. Engine cold. Keys already in my hand from the coated cabinet. Standard protocol. Nothing unusual. Exactly what any morning looked like. I approached the vehicle, and I did the one thing I had planned 12 minutes earlier when I was alone down here. I activated the tracker. Small, magnetic, already placed on the underside of the dash 3 days ago during a routine interior check that nobody thought to supervise because nobody supervised furniture. The moment that engine turned over, his location would transmit. Live. Continuous, irrefutable. I stepped back, logged the key, stood at my post. Wudian Si Fen. Sung-il came down first. He swept the bay the way he always swept it. Left to right, dominant side first. The blind spot on his right exactly where it had always been. I was on his right. He logged me his furniture and moved to his position near the elevator. 5:46. The elevator opened again. Jaywook. Sharp suit, composed face, left hand already moving toward that jacket pocket. The check, not the confirmation. Fear wearing its calm mask all the way to the end. His eyes swept the bay. Not searching. Confirming territory. The way a man looks at a room he believes he owns. Not looking for danger. Just registering possession. He didn't look at me. He never did. He moved to the Genesis, opened the door, settled into the driver's seat with the particular ease of a man who believed he was already gone, already across the border, already untouchable, already free. His hand reached for the ignition, fingers closing around the key. And that's when I saw the phone. Passenger seat, unlocked, screen lit. I was 3 feet away. Close enough to read it. One message. 4 words. Dube is alive. 40 minutes. The board didn't just shift. It flipped entirely. This wasn't about documents anymore. This wasn't about evidence, or prosecutors, or financial transfers. Zanelli was alive. And in 40 minutes, someone was moving her. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I didn't run the board one final time. I just moved. My hand closed around the glass breaker. I looked at the back of Cheon Jae-wook's head. This man who had never once looked at me. And I swung. The glass didn't crack. It exploded. One strike. Clean. Direct. Everything behind it. And the driver's window of the charcoal gray Genesis detonated inward like it had been waiting for permission. The sound cracked through that bay like a gunshot. Sung-il spun. Jae-wook's body jerked. Pure reflex. The first uncontrolled movement I'd ever seen from him. And his hand released the ignition key like it had burned him. But I was already inside the window frame. Both hands. Collar. Pull. Not a drag. A commitment. Every ounce of 93 days behind it. Every morning of logging keys and smiling at men who barked, and tucking a photograph into a jacket lining, and learning a language in secret, and standing in the rain at a south entrance, wondering if any of it would be enough. All of it arrived in that single pull. Cheon Jae-wook came across the center console, through the broken frame, and hit the concrete floor of his own parking bay hard enough that the sound echoed. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Not Sung-il. Not the 2 men positioned near the SUVs. Not the 3 federal marshals already moving through the service entrance on the far side of the bay. Nobody moved because nobody had a category for what they had just watched happen. The boss of the Korean syndicate's entire West Coast operation. The man that whole precincts were afraid to name out loud. The man that judges and commissioners had spent careers trying to touch. Was on the floor, pulled there by his valet. Then the Genesis exploded. Ignition system, shaped charge, wired to the starter relay by hands that were never supposed to touch that car. The driver's seat punched into the roof. The windshield blew outward in one white sheet. Fire rolled up through the hood in a slow, certain wave. The blast pressure hit Sung-il sideways and drove him into the column. The 2 men near the SUVs went down, and I was already standing over Jae-wook. Glass in my hair, hands still vibrating from the pull, chest heaving, staring down at the most dangerous man on the West Coast. He looked up at me. Really looked. For the first time in 93 days, Cheon Jae-wook saw me. Not the uniform, not the key log, not the furniture he walked past every morning without registering. Me. And what crossed his face in that moment wasn't hatred. It wasn't rage. It was something rawer than both. The specific devastation of a man who realizes the thing that ended him was someone he chose not to see. The federal marshals reached him in under 10 seconds. Professional, efficient. The kind of movement that had been rehearsed for exactly this location, exactly this morning, because someone had called the night before with 9 words and airtight timing. Sung-il was neutralized before he recovered his footing. The 2 men near the SUVs didn't resist. I stepped back. Let them work. Stood against the far column with my back to the concrete, and my hands finally still. The bay smelled like broken glass and burning metal and something that had no name. 93 days. 1 pull. Jae-wook was on his feet now. Cuffed. Composed. Rebuilding the mask even in the middle of being arrested, because men like him never fully stop performing control. But as they walked him toward the service entrance, he looked back at me one more time. Just once. Said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything a man says when he finally understands. Too late. Exactly who he was dealing with. The arrest took 4 minutes. Clean. Practiced. The kind of operation that looks effortless because every variable was confirmed the night before by someone who had spent 3 months making sure nothing was left to chance. Sung-il didn't fight. When men like Sung-il see federal marshals moving with that kind of certainty, they calculate instantly. Fighting costs more than it returns. He went still, let them work, and stored whatever he was feeling somewhere deep behind that flat expression. The two men near the SUVs followed his lead. The lead marshal, a woman, composed, fast, crossed the bay toward me the moment Jae-wook was secured. I handed her the secondary phone before she asked. She looked at the screen, read the message. Her eyes moved to mine. How long ago did this come in? 3 minutes before I moved. She was already on her radio. 37 minutes. That's what we had. Zanelli was alive. The message confirmed it. But alive and being moved were two entirely different things. Once they relocated her, the trail reset. New location, new handlers, new timeline that started from zero. 37 minutes to find a woman in a city that had already hidden her once. I stood in that bay and felt something I hadn't budgeted for. Fear. Not for myself. I had made my peace with the personal risk somewhere around Thursday midnight, staring at a ceiling in the dark. Fear for her. Zanele Dube, who had done everything right, who had built something airtight and careful and damning, who had been disappeared for it by people who assumed the right silence made problems stop existing. She was 11 miles east, and I was standing in a parking bay with glass in my hair and nothing left to do but wait. Jae-wook passed me on his way to the service entrance, cuffed, flanked, still wearing the suit like it meant something. He stopped. 1 second. Just one. Directly beside me. The marshal at his arm tensed. Jae-wook didn't move, didn't reach, just turned his head slightly and looked at me the way you look at something that has permanently recalibrated your understanding of the world. He said 2 words. Lo, Korean. I understood them. Yal haiseo. Well done. Then they walked him through the door and it closed behind him, and the bay went quiet in the specific way spaces go quiet after something irreversible happens inside them. I didn't move for a long time. Just stood there. Glass on the floor, burning metal smell fading, the Genesis still smoking in its assigned spot. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 1 message. 4 words from the lead marshal. We have a location. 31 minutes left. I couldn't go with them. That was the part nobody tells you about this kind of work. You spend 93 days building something. Every observation, every logged key, every smile at a man who barked at you like you were nothing. And when the moment finally arrives, your part ends before the ending does. I had done everything I could do. The rest belonged to people with badges and vehicles and jurisdiction 11 miles east. So I waited. The bay was wrecked. Genesis still smoking in its spot. Glass across the concrete in a wide, permanent-looking scatter. The smell of burnt metal hanging in the cold air like it had decided to stay. I sat down on the concrete floor. Not dramatically. Not because my legs gave out. Just because standing felt like too much effort for a body that had been running on grief and purpose for 3 months straight, and had just, finally, put the weight down. I sat, and I let myself feel it. The fear first. The specific terror of those 31 minutes. Knowing she was out there. Knowing the clock was moving. Knowing I had done everything within my reach, and the rest was completely out of my hands. Then the exhaustion. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that doesn't come from one sleepless night, but from 93 days of performing calm you didn't feel. Carrying information you couldn't share. Being invisible inside a machine that would have disappeared you without hesitation if it had known what you were doing. Then, the grief. Not new grief. Old grief. The kind that had been driving this from the beginning. The voice on the phone 7 months ago, cracked and desperate, saying her sister's name like it was already past tense. I let all of it arrive. sitting on the concrete floor of an underground bay with glass in my hair. My phone buzzed at 6:31. 8 minutes into the 31. Lead marshal. 2 words. She's out. I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone face down on the concrete beside me, and I sat in the quiet for a long time. Not because I was sad, because some moments deserve more than moving on quickly. Zanele Dube walked out of that facility under her own portmanteau at 6:29 a.m. 4 months. She was out. The debrief took 2 hours. 3 agents, 1 recorder, a table that had absorbed 1,000 conversations like this one. Flat, institutional, built for function, not comfort. They asked everything in the order people always ask things. Chronologically, methodically, with the particular patience of people trained to find the gap between what someone says and what actually happened. There were no gaps. I had 93 days of clean, consecutive, documented observation. Every schedule change, every pocket touch, every vehicle mile discrepancy, every fragment of overheard Korean cross-referenced against what the financial evidence later confirmed. I gave them all of it. They wrote it down, with the careful expressions of people trying not to look impressed. Then the lead agent, the woman from the bay, still composed, coffee untouched, looked up from her notes. How did you know Friday was the window? I told her about the acoustical quirk in the bay, the curved concrete walls, the drainage channels, the half-wall of steel lockers that made me invisible to anyone standing at the far end. She wrote that down too. Then she asked the question they had all been building toward. How did you know to move when you did, at that specific second? I told her the truth. Not the tactical truth, the human one. He reached for that ignition like a man who thought he was already gone. I had watched Cheon Jae-wook for 93 days. I knew the difference between how he moved when he was in control and how he moved when he was performing control. That morning, settling into that seat, reaching for that key, he moved like a man exhaling for the first time in weeks. Relaxed, certain, already somewhere else in his mind. That certainty was the tell. A man that's certain doesn't check his mirrors, doesn't register the woman 3 feet behind him, doesn't feel the geometry of a room changing around him. She looked at me for a long moment after that, not writing, just looking. Then she clicked her pen closed, straightened her notes, and said something that wasn't in any report and never made it into any file. 93 days, alone, no cover, no backup. She shook her head once. Small, almost imperceptible. That's not training. That's something else entirely. I didn't respond, because she was right. It wasn't training. It was a photograph in a jacket lining. It was a name written in careful print on the back of a single image. It was a woman I had never met, who had done everything right and been disappeared for it, whose face I carried against my ribs for 3 months until I could put it somewhere safe. That's what it was. I signed the last form at 9:47 a.m., walked out into a morning that smelled like rain and exhaust, and a city that had no idea what had happened 11 miles east and 1 floor underground while it was still sleeping. I didn't call anyone. Didn't stop anywhere. Just walked. Days later. The city moves on. Kendra doesn't. Zanele Dube never learned who saved her. She walked out of that facility into a gray Friday morning, wrapped in a federal jacket, squinting at daylight she hadn't seen in 4 months. She gave her statement. She cooperated fully. She identified accounts, names, transfer routes. Everything she had built before they took her, reconstructed from memory with the precision of a woman who had survived by staying sharp. Her case held. Every transfer, every account, every thread. It held. The syndicate's West Coast operation collapsed over the following 3 weeks. Not loudly. Not in the way dramatic things collapse in movies. All at once, with ceremony. It collapsed the way real empires collapse. Quietly, from the inside, one name at a time. Jae-wook's trial date was set without fanfare. Sung-il cooperated in exchange for considerations I was never told the details of. The internal accounts manager, the one who had kept Zanelli's documents as insurance, testified first. He walked out of the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon, looking like a man who had just put down something very heavy. I understood that feeling. I went back to work. Different hotel, different city, different entrance. Same uniform, same key log, same south-facing post in the rain. Some people restart. I just continued. 3 months after the arrest, I received a single message through the same channel the photograph had come through. No name, no explanation. Just 4 words. She asks about you. I read it twice, put my phone in my pocket, and stood at my post in the rain for a long time. Zanelli didn't know my name, didn't know my face, didn't know that the person who found her photograph in a glove box had spent 93 days becoming invisible inside the machine that took her just to pull one man out of one car at exactly the right second. She just knew that someone had. That was enough. It had always been enough. That's the thing about playing chess in the dark. You don't move for applause. You don't move for recognition. You move because the board is set, and someone has to be the piece that changes everything. And most people are waiting for someone else to do it. I stopped waiting a long time ago. Cheon Jae-wook looked up at me from that concrete floor and saw me. Really saw me. For the first and last time. And somewhere in this city right now, the person who originally ordered Zanelli's disappearance is still out there. Still watching. Still waiting to see if anyone is paying attention. She saved a woman she never met. Walked away without asking for her name to be known. And somewhere out there, the person who started all of this is still free. If this story lived in your chest the way it was meant to, subscribe right now. Because this channel finds the stories nobody else is telling. And the next one, it starts where this one just ended.